Hi, everybody. So, I'm going to be reviewing chapter 10 of my book. The book is called Whose Life Is It? The Moral Debt for Life Enslavement. All right, now let's go to chapter 10. Make sure you all can see it. Chapter 10 Procreation as the Root Cause of Life Slavery. Chapters 1 through 7 documented the complete system of life slavery. Chapter 1 You do not own your life, the state does by prohibiting disposal rights. Chapter 2 Your parents enslaved you through non consensual procreation, creating the moral debt for life enslavement. Chapter 3 The state compounds this breach by prohibiting a humane exit while extracting value. Chapter 4 Courts deny constitutional relief, serving as gatekeepers of life slavery. Chapter 5 State control over disposal rights operates as a legal mechanism of life enslavement. Chapter 6 The state deploys comprehensive perpetual violence to maintain captivity and forced participation. Chapter 7 Capitalism extracts surplus value through violence backed coercion. Chapter 8 Democracy cannot remedy life slavery because participation is coerced and majorities benefit from maintaining life slavery. Chapter 9, the accounting reveals total asymmetry. You pay over 5.9 million plus immeasurable suffering with no remuneration. But this complete analysis reveals a deeper question. What is the root cause of all of this harm? Where does the chain of enslavement begin? The answer is procreation itself. Your parents' decision to create you without your consent is the ultimate breach from which all subsequent oppression flows. This chapter demonstrates why procreation is the root cause of life slavery and why abstaining from procreation is the only effective tool for dismantling the system of life slavery. The fundamental argument is the fundamental argument against procreation rests on the asymmetry between bringing someone into existence and leaving someone in a state of non existence. This asymmetry reveals that procreation always harms the person, while abstaining from procreation harms no one. You cannot benefit from being brought into existence. To benefit from something means to be made better off than you would have been without it. This requires comparison between two states, your state with the benefit and your state without the benefit. But you cannot compare existence to non existence from the perspective of the person brought into existence because there was no person in non existence to be worse off. Before you existed, there was no you experiencing any deprivation in a state of non existence. Non existence is not a state of suffering or lack or need. It is a complete absence of need. There is no consciousness experiencing a desire to exist. No person wishing they had been, no person wishing they could be born. No entity that needed existence but lacked it. Therefore, bringing you into existence did not make you better off than you were in non existence because there was no you in non existence to be improved. Parents might claim they gave you the gift of life or that you should be grateful for existence. This framing fails. A gift is supposed to benefit its recipient, but you cannot benefit by being brought in from non existence to existence because there is no you in non existence to receive any benefit. You can only benefit from things that happen to you after you exist. Existence itself is not something that benefits you because you hadn't to exist before anything could benefit you. Some people report that they are glad they exist, that they enjoy life, that existence is valuable to them. This subjective experience does not prove that being brought into existence benefited them. They can only evaluate existence from within existence. They had no memory of non existence to compare it against. They are simply reporting that they prefer a continued existence to death now that they exist. This preference for continuing once the person exists does not mean they benefited from being brought into existence in the first place. You are always harmed by being brought into existence. In contrast to the inability to benefit from being brought into existence, you are necessarily harmed by it. Once you exist, you experience suffering. This suffering is guaranteed. No one lives without experiencing pain, illness, loss, frustration, fear, disappointment, and death. The intensity and duration of suffering varies, but its presence is universal. Author, author Schopenhauer captured this essential truth about existence. If the immediate and direct purpose of our life is not suffering, then our existence is the most ill adapted to its purpose in the world. For it is absurd to suppose that the endless affliction of which the world is everywhere full, and which arises out of the need and distress pertaining essentially to life, should be purposeless and purely accidental. Each individual misfortune, to be sure, seems an exceptional occurrence, but misfortune in general is the rule. Your parents knew or should have known that creating you would subject you to suffering. They could not guarantee you would have a good life. They could not protect you from harm. They gambled with your well being by creating you despite knowing that you would inevitably suffer. As Schopenhauer observed, suffering is not accidental or exceptional, it is the rule of existence itself. The harm is comprehensive. Chapter 9 quantified these costs. You spend 60.9 years of your life on basic survival activities. You pay 2,785,000 in forced expenditures for maintaining the body your parents gave you. Capitalists extract another 2.7 million in surplus value from labor you must perform to survive. Additional costs bring the total measurable burden to over 5.96 million. You experience comprehensive psychological suffering from awareness of your own mortality, from navigating systems you never chose, from bearing burdens imposed without consent. All of this suffering was imposed on you by your parents' decision to procreate. Your parents broke you by creating a body that suffers, fails, and dies. They cannot claim that positive experiences you might have justify imposing that harm. This creates an asymmetry in moral evaluation of procreation versus abstaining from procreation. Procreation creates a person who will suffer, this is a guaranteed harm, creates no person who benefits because it is impossible to benefit from being created, imposes comprehensive costs on someone who never consented, serves only the parent's interest in having children. Abstaining from procreation creates no person who suffers because it harms no one, deprives no one of existence because there is no person who exists to be deprived, imposes no cost on no one, prevents all suffering that would have been experienced by the person who was not created. The asymmetry is stark. Procreation guarantees harm to the created person while providing no genuine benefit. Abstaining from procreation prevents harm while causing no loss to anyone because no one exists to be deprived. From a moral perspective, abstaining from procreation is always preferable to procreating. Parents procreate for their own reasons. They want children, they want to experience parenthood, they want meaning and purpose and emotional satisfaction. These are selfish reasons. They serve the parent's interest, not the interest of the person who necessarily suffers from being created. Procreation is using another person as a means to your end without the person's consent. The consent problem. Even setting aside the asymmetry argument, procreation fails basic ethical requirements around consent. Any action that imposes high cost or risk on another person requires that person's permission. Procreation imposes the most comprehensive cost possible. Existence itself, with all its attendant suffering, without any possibility of obtaining consent. You cannot consent to being created because you do not exist before creation. Consent requires a person who can evaluate information, consider alternatives, and make a decision. Before you lived, there was no one to consent to. Your parents made a unilateral decision that affected you profoundly without any possibility of obtaining consent. This is not like other situations where we make decisions for people who cannot consent, such as medical decisions for unconscious patients or legal decisions for children. In those cases, we're trying to serve the interests of an existing person who temporarily cannot make decisions for themselves. We are not creating the person. The person already exists and has interests that we are trying to protect. Your parents were not serving your interests when they procreated because you had no interest. You did not exist. They created you for their own interests. They wanted a child. They felt entitled to a human being to serve their interests. They wanted the benefits children provide: meaning, purpose, emotional satisfaction, and legacy. They created you to serve these purposes. This is using another person as a means to their ends in the most literal sense possible, bringing a person into existence to serve their purposes. In all other contexts, we would recognize that imposing high costs or risks on others without consent is unethical. You cannot perform medical procedures on someone without permission. You cannot take someone's property without consent. You cannot enter someone into a contract without consent. We recognize that autonomy requires control over what happens to you, and that control requires that others obtain your consent before imposing consequences on you. Procreation violates this principle absolutely. Your parents imposed the most comprehensive cost possible, existence itself, without any consent. They subjected you to risks they could not control: genetic diseases, mental illness, disability, poverty, abuse, trauma, and countless other possible harms. They could not guarantee you would have a good life. They created you anyway, gambling with your well being for their own benefit. Some argue that parents cannot reasonably assume that most people would, some would argue that parents can reasonably assume that most people would consent to existence if they were consulted. This argument fails on multiple grounds. First, many people explicitly state they wish they had never been born. According to research from the CDC's National Hospital Ambulatory Medical Care Survey, the lifetime prevalence of suicidal ideation in the United States is 15.6%. While suicidal ideation measures wanting to end one's current existence rather than wishing one had never been born, it demonstrates that substantial portions of the population find existence sufficiently burdensome that they consider ending it. These people clearly would not have consented if consulted. None of these people would have experienced suicidal ideation if they had not been created in the first place. Second, even people who report being glad they exist might not have consented if they had been genuinely consulted beforehand. People evaluate life from within it, with all the cognitive biases and psychological adaptations that make continued existence tolerable. If they had, if they could have been consulted from a position of genuine non-existence, they might have declined. Third, hypothetical consent is not actual consent. We do not generally accept hypothetical consent as a substitute for actual consent. If a doctor performs surgery on an unconscious patient and later says, I think they would have consented if they could have, we do not accept this as an adequate justification unless there are emergency circumstances where the action serves the patient's interest. Neither condition applies to procreation. Obtaining consent is impossible, but there is no emergency, and the action serves parents' interest rather than the created person's interest. Procreation is a unilateral decision made by parents that affect another person comprehensively without the person's input. This violates fundamental principles of autonomy and respect for persons. Parents decide for their own reasons that someone should exist. They create that person. They should subject that person to all the risks and costs of existence. The created person has no voice in this decision, despite being a person who bears all the consequences. This unilateral imposition is what makes procreation the original breach. Every subsequent exploitation documented in chapters 1 through 6 flows from this initial act. Parents imposed existence. They created someone who would need maintenance, who would suffer, who would be subject to state power and capitalist extraction, who would have to navigate systems they never chose. All these harms documented in previous chapters trace back to this original decision by parents to create someone without the person's consent. Beyond the consent problem, procreation imposes risks that parents cannot control and cannot compensate. The uncontrollable risk. When your parents decided to procreate, they could not control numerous risks they imposed on you. Genetic risk. You might inherit genes causing disability, mental illness, chronic pain, or other conditions that make life extremely difficult. Parents cannot prevent these outcomes. Many genetic risks are unpredictable or unavoidable. Your parents gamble that you would not be among those who suffer from serious genetic conditions. Environmental risk. You might be born into poverty, war, famine, or social conditions that make life extremely difficult. Even affluent parents in stable countries cannot guarantee their children will not experience economic hardship, social upheaval, or environmental uh, catastrophe. Excuse me, catastrophe. You Psychological risk. You might develop mental illness, experience trauma, or have psychological characteristics that make existence unbearable. Parents cannot prevent depression, anxiety disorders, personality disorders, or trauma responses. Your parents gambled that you would not be among those whose psychological suffering makes continued existence feel unbearable. Social risk. You might experience abuse, neglect, bullying, discrimination, or social rejection that causes severe suffering. Even attentive parents cannot prevent all abuse. They cannot eliminate discrimination. They cannot guarantee their children will have positive social experiences. Existential risk. You might find existence itself fundamentally unsatisfying. You might struggle with meaninglessness. You might experience existential despair that no amount of comfort or success alleviates. Parents cannot guarantee their children will find life meaningful or worthwhile. The gamble is not justified. This gamble would not be justified even if parents could somehow compensate for bad outcomes. If you are born with a severe disability, if you develop severe mental illness, if you experience trauma that makes life unbearable, your parents cannot undo these harms. They cannot give you back the non existence you had before they created you. The harms are irreversible. Furthermore, parents do not typically bear the cost of bad outcomes. If you are born with a disability, you bear the burden of living with that disability. If you develop a mental illness, you bear the suffering. Your parents might feel sad that you suffer, but they continue living their lives while you are the one actually suffering. They impose the risk on you, but you bear the cost of those risks materializing. This asymmetry reveals the exploitative nature of procreation. Parents obtain benefits, the meaning, the purpose, the emotional satisfaction that children provide, while the created person bears all the risks and costs. If the gamble pays off and you have a tolerable life, your parents benefit from your existence. If the gamble fails and you suffer terribly, you bear that suffering while parents merely feel regret. Procreation is reckless endangerment. If someone endangered another person in ways parents endanger children through procreation, we would consider it reckless endangerment. If you expose someone to genetic diseases, to a risk of mental illness, to the chance of severe suffering, all without their consent and for your own benefit, you would be condemned. Yet we excuse this when it is done through procreation rather than through post-birth actions. Procreation is violence, raping a person into existence. Procreation is fundamentally an act of violence. Specifically, it is forcing someone into existence without their consent in a manner analogous to rape. This claim requires careful philosophical justification because the standard objection is that rape is violence against someone who exists. In contrast, the person brought into existence did not exist beforehand to be violated. The resolution lies in the potentiality argument from abortion ethics. Opponents of abortion argue that a fetus is a person from conception because it possesses the intrinsic potential to develop into a fully conscious human being, making the fertilized egg morally the same as the future adult. If we accept this framework, that personal identity exists from conception based on potential personhood, then the procreative act becomes an irreversible imposition upon that existing identity even before sentience develops. This creates a philosophical trap for those who oppose both abortion and antinatalism. If a potential human being is a person worthy of the right to life, the anti abortion stance, then that potential person is also worthy of the right to not be subjected to the comprehensive, non consensual harm of existence. One cannot claim the fetus has personhood sufficient to prohibit abortion while simultaneously denying that same personhood sufficient moral status to make procreation a violation against them. The violence of procreation operates as follows: your parents created you, bringing into existence an identity that would become a conscious, suffering person without any possibility of obtaining consent. They impose existence on you. This imposition includes guaranteed suffering, pain, illness, aging, fear, loss, and death. They knew these harms were inevitable. They created you anyway for their own selfish reasons, meaning, legacy, emotional satisfaction. Violence is the imposition of physical harm on another person without their consent. Procreation meets this definition precisely. The fact that the person did not exist in a state of consciousness before being created does not eliminate the violence. If we accept the potential framework that establishes personhood from conception, then the person's identity existed from that moment and was violated by being forced into existence. The violence is particularly egregious because it cannot be undone. The harm your parents imposed is permanent. You must live with the consequences of their violent imposition for your entire existence until death finally ends what they began. The state compounds this violence by prohibiting you from exiting the condition your parents imposed. As Chapter 6 documented, the state deploys comprehensive perpetual violence to maintain your captivity. But the original violence is parental. Your parents initiated the chain of violence by creating you. Some might object that calling procreation rape is inflammatory, but consider the parallels. Rape is forcing someone into a physical experience they did not consent to for the rapist's gratification, causing harm and trauma to the victim. Procreation is forcing someone into existence they did not consent to for the parent's gratification, causing guaranteed harm to the created person. The structural similarity is precise. Recognizing procreation as violence reframes the moral analysis completely. Parents are not benefactors who gave you life. They are aggressors who impose comprehensive harm without consent. Every reason to procreate is selfish. There is not a single reason to procreate that is not fundamentally selfish. Every motivation for having children serves the interests of those who already exist, primarily parents, rather than serving any interest of the person being created. Before procreation, no person existed who could have interest to be served. After procreation, a person exists who necessarily suffers. The only interest that could motivate the transition from non existence to existence are the interests of those who already exist. Procreation is an inherently selfish act because it can only serve the interests of existing persons, never the interests of the person being created who has no interest before existing and no need for existence. Consider any reason someone might give for procreating, and you will find it reduces to serving their pre existing interests. I want to experience the joy of parenthood. This is using another person to provide you with emotional experiences you desire. I want someone to carry on the family name, genes, legacy. This is using another person to serve your desire for continuation beyond death. I want to give love and have someone to love me. This is using another person to fulfill your emotional needs. Having children gives my life meaning and purpose. This is using another person to solve your existential crisis. Society expects it, and I want to fulfill that expectation. This is using another person to gain social approval. I want someone to take care of me when I'm old. This is using someone as a future insurance for elderly care. My partner wants children, and I want to make them happy. This is using another person to maintain your relationship. I believe it's God's will, my duty to procreate. This is using another person to fulfill your religious obligations, essentially using someone to secure your place in heaven. What about justifications referencing others' interests? Some argue they procreate to benefit existing persons or even other species. These justifications are equally selfish because they use the created person as a means to serve interests that are not their own. I'm procreating to build a vegan army to save animals. This argument made by some vegan anti-natalists who create an exception for procreation fundamentally misunderstands both anti-natalism and the prohibition against using persons as a means to their ends. It is unethical to enslave someone to a lifetime of suffering, even suffering that might reduce animal suffering. This reasoning this reasoning fails on multiple levels. First, you cannot guarantee your children will share your values. Second, even if your children remain vegan through adulthood, they harm the harm they cause through mere existence, environmental destruction, resource consumption, may exceed any good they do when compared to not being brought into existence. Third, the time, money, and resources spent raising children could have been invested directly in animal activism with far greater impact. Fourth, and most fundamentally, you are creating a person to serve as a means to an end, treating that person as a tool for animal liberation rather than as an end in themselves. Those who procreate to save animals or to save the planet are not anti-natalists at all. They're simply repackaging the same selfish logic that drives all procreation. I want something, and I will enslave a new person to get what I want, regardless of the cost those people will bear. I'm procreating because humanity needs to continue. This argument serves the abstract interests of humanity as a collective, not the interests of the person created. It uses individuals as a means to the ends of species continuation. The created person bears all costs of existence while humanity obtains whatever abstract benefit comes from the person's involuntary existence. I'm procreating to create more happiness, reduce more suffering than a person will experience. This utilitarian justification still serves existing interests, those who benefit from the created person's actions, rather than the interests of the created person. You are making someone a net producer of utility for others. You are gambling with the well being on the chance that they will produce more value for others than they suffer themselves. This is using a person as a means to other people's ends, and the gamble is made without their consent. The gift framing is dishonest. Chapter 6 establishes that parents receive continuous benefits from your existence while you bear all the costs, the foundation of the moral debt for life enslavement. Parents often frame procreation as a gift they give to children. This framing is dishonest. Gifts benefit recipients, but you cannot benefit from being brought into existence. Existence is not something you needed or lacked. Giving you existence was not helping you, it was serving parents' interest or parents' desire to have children. This framing also obscures the fact that children bear all the costs. If procreation were truly a gift, parents would bear the cost of providing it. Parents impose parents impose comprehensive costs on children while claiming that children should be grateful. Chapter 9 documented these costs over 5.96 million in measurable costs plus comprehensive psychological suffering. Parents impose all of these costs, then claim it was a gift you should appreciate. This is not gift giving. This is imposing burdens on others while expecting appreciation for the imposition. Furthermore, recipients can refuse gifts. You cannot deny existence once you have been created. Parents impose existence unilaterally, then claim it was a gift you should appreciate. The impossibility of non selfish procreation is built into the structure of the act itself. Procreation always serves existing interests at the expense of creating a new person who will bear the cost. The non identity problem and unjust enrichment solution. Traditional anti-natalists face the non identity problem. You cannot be wrong by being brought into existence because if you had not been brought into existence, you would not exist to be wronged. Different actions would have resulted in a different person or no person, not you having a better life. This framing has allowed parents to evade moral responsibility by claiming they did not wrong anyone. The non identity problem is that the person who exists as a result of procreation could not exist if different reproductive choices have been made. Therefore, you cannot claim you were wrong by being brought into existence because the alternative would not be you having a better life, but you not existing at all. You cannot compare your existence to non existence and claim you would have been better off non existing because there would be no you to be better off. Philosophers have struggled with this problem for decades. Some argue it eliminates the basis for objecting to procreation. If the created person cannot claim to have been wrong if no specific person was made worse off, then procreation cannot be wrong in the harm based sense, even if it causes suffering. Chapter 2 introduced the moral debt for life enslavement framework that solved the non identity problem by shifting the focus from harm to unjust enrichment. The question is not whether you were wrong by being brought into existence, but whether your parents are currently being enriched from your existence at your detriment without providing restitution. This framework avoids the non identity problem entirely. Present tense analysis. Parents are benefiting right now from your existence. You exist and provide benefits to your parents through your existence. This is not hypothetical or counterfactual. This is an observable current reality. Unjust enrichment requires no prior wrong. Unjust enrichment does not require that the enriched party commit a prior wrong. It requires only that they receive a benefit at another's expense under circumstances making retention without restitution unjust. Parents receive benefits from your existence. These benefits come at your expense in the form of all costs you bear. Retention is unjust because you never consented. Create specific debts. The unjust enrichment framework creates specific obligations. Parents owe forced heirship, respect for your autonomy, including the right to opt out, and forfeiture of their own right to opt out until debts are discharged. These are concrete remedies for present tense extraction. Avoids metaphysical harms. We are not claiming that you were harmed by being brought from non existence to existence. We are claiming that you exist now, that you bear costs now, that parents benefit now, and that this present tense asymmetry creates moral obligations now. This avoids all metaphysical problems about comparing existence to non existence. The non identity problem attempted to eliminate accountability for procreation by claiming no one was wrong. The unjust enrichment framework restores accountability by demonstrating that even if no one was wrong by being created, parents are enriched by your existence and owe you restitution for that enrichment. Why antinatalism requires enforcement? Democracy enables continued procreation. Chapter 8 demonstrated that Democratic majorities benefit from life slavery and will not vote to end it. Chapter 6 quantified the cost imposed on each new person over 5.96 million in measurable costs plus comprehensive psychological suffering. Democratic majorities understand these costs and continue procreating anyway. Why? Because they benefit and bear none of the costs. Parents derive meaning, purpose, emotional satisfaction, and a sense of legacy from children. They do not pay the over 5.96 million that their children will pay. They are not the ones who will have to experience the psychological suffering existence imposes on their children. They create new people to serve parental interests, while those created bear all the costs. This is why academic antinatalism fails to prevent procreation. People understand the arguments. They know that procreation imposes suffering without consent. They know no one can benefit from being brought into existence. They know that abstaining from procreation prevents suffering while harming no one. They procreate anyway because philosophy creates no consequences for selfishness. Democracy cannot end procreation for the same reason democracy cannot end life slavery. Those who benefit from the current system control democratic processes and will not go against their own interests. Antinatalism requires creating consequences. Academic antinatalism has existed for decades, yet procreation continues at an unabated rate. Arguments articulated clearly in philosophy journals reach few people. Even when arguments reach people, they change nothing because understanding arguments is different from being motivated to act on them. People are selfish. They respond to consequences, not to philosophical reasoning. This insight shaped the framework of, this insight shapes the framework for preventing future procreation. We cannot rely on philosophical persuasion to convince people not to procreate. We must create moral consequences that make procreation costly to those who choose it. These consequences must be strong enough to outweigh the benefits parents receive from procreating. Chapter 2 establishes the moral debt for life enslavement parents currently owe for having already procreated. Forced heirship. Parents must pass at least 50% of their estates to their children with no power of disinheritance. This is partial. The debt can never be fully repaid, payment for the benefits received, and the costs imposed. Respect for autonomy. Parents must respect their children's complete autonomy, including the right to opt out of existence. Humanely, they cannot resort to state violence or guilt to prevent their children's autonomous disposal. Forfeiture of exit rights until parents discharge their moral debt for life enslavement. They forfeit their own right to opt out. If they attempt to exit before providing restitution to their children, they admit their own suffering makes existence unbearable while imposing that same existence on others without their consent. These consequences exist already for past procreation. These consequences exist already for past procreation. They must be expanded and enforced for future procreation to make creating new life slaves costly enough that fewer people choose to do it. The forfeiture criterion. Chapter 2 introduced the forfeiture criterion. Parents who procreate forfeit their own right to opt out until they discharge their debts to their children. This operates as a natural deterrent to procreate. Consider, if you procreate, you create someone who will suffer. That person may eventually want to opt out. If you respect their autonomy, you must allow this. But you also forfeit your own ability to opt out until you have remunerated them for the existence you impose. This creates a perverse outcome for parents. If your child suffers badly enough to want to opt out, you enable that suffering by making them. They may exist with medical assistance as is their right, but you must continue existing, potentially suffering yourself until you discharge the debt you created by procreating. You should not be allowed to escape your own existence when you impose that same existence on someone else without their consent. The forfeiture criterion makes procreation a trap. If life goes well, you receive benefits from having children. If life goes badly, your child cannot. If life goes badly, your child can opt out, but you cannot. You must continue bearing whatever suffering drove you to want to exit, but because you owe a debt for having imposed existence on someone else. The consequence is proportionate. Parents impose an existence that includes the risk of severe suffering. They gamble with another person's well being. If that gamble fails, they bear consequences by forcing their own escape route while their children retains the right to opt out. This forces parents to internalize the risk they impose on others. The forfeiture criterion also operates as a preventive deterrent. If potential parents understand they will forfeit their own right to opt out by procreating, many will choose not to procreate. They will recognize they are gambling not only with another person's well being, but their own ability to exit if existence becomes unbearable. Social delegitimization. Beyond formal legal consequences, procreation must be socially delegitimized. Currently, procreation is celebrated. Parents are congratulated when they announce pregnancy. Children are expected to express gratitude for existence. Society treats procreation as normal, good, and praiseworthy. This social validation must end. Procreation must be recognized as what it is, a selfish act that imposes comprehensive costs on another person without their consent to serve parents' interests. Those who procreate must face social disapproval. This Those who procreate must face social disapproval proportionate to the harm they cause. This does not mean cruelty towards parents or children. It means honestly acknowledging that procreation is unethical. It means refusing to congratulate people for procreating. It means speaking openly about the harm procreation imposes. It means supporting those who choose not to procreate and building a culture that treats that choice as ethical rather than as deviation requiring explanation. Social delegitimization changes incentives by removing social rewards for procreation. Currently, people procreate partially for social validation. If procreation loses social validation and instead carries social disapproval, fewer people would choose it. Chapter 2 establishes what parents owe because they procreated. This chapter explains why the act of procreation itself is unethical, making those debts restitutionary but not compensatory. Chapters 2 and 10 form a complete response to the imposition of procreation. Chapter 2, remedy for past harms. Parents who already procreated owe forced heirships, respect for autonomy, including the right to opt out, and forfeiture of their own right to opt out. These statutes must be enforced to provide restitution for harms already imposed. Chapter 10, prevention of future harms. Procreation itself is wrong because it imposes costs without consent, violates autonomy, gambles with others' well being, and serves only selfish interests. Procreation must be prevented through enforcement of consequences, social delegitimization, and cultural transformation. The ultimate goal is ending procreation entirely. New people should No new people should be brought into existence without consent because consent is impossible and existence necessarily includes suffering. Until that goal is achieved, those already forced into existence deserve restitution from those who forced them into it. Why not state prohibition on procreation? If procreation is wrong, if it imposes existence without consent, creates new life slaves, and serves only parental selfishness, why doesn't this book demand that the state prohibit it? The answer is principled anarchist opposition to state violence. State prohibition would require state violence. A state prohibition on procreation would require state surveillance on reproductive choices and intimate relationships. State violence against those who procreate despite the prohibition. State control over bodies and reproductive decisions. Forced sterilization or forced abortion to enforce the prohibition. Massive expansion of state power, new categories of criminals, and new justification for state violence. This contradicts anarchist principles. The state already uses violence illegitimately to prohibit the right to a peaceful exit. Adding state violence to prohibit procreation expands illegitimate state power. The state should not control our bodies, neither by prohibiting one's exit, nor by prohibiting procreation. Voluntary accountability without state violence. The moral death for life enslavement framework corrects consequences for procreation without requiring state violence. Parents voluntarily assume moral deaths by choosing to procreate. The moral death for life enslavement arises from the act itself, not from state compulsion. When parents create someone without consent, they incur moral debts to that person. These debts exist whether or not any state enforces them. As established in the introduction, these steps operate through the anarchist framework of voluntary accountability and social consequences. Social and economic pressure make procreation costly. Mandatory inheritance requirements, forfeiture of exit right, social delegitimization, and moral accountability operate through voluntary mechanisms. People choose not to procreate when consequences become clear. No state violence is required. Cultural transformation makes procreation morally indefensible, just as chattel slavery became culturally unacceptable through changing norms rather than state prohibition alone. Procreation can become morally indefensible through a cultural shift. When society recognizes procreation as unethical and starts holding people ethically accountable, people will stop doing it voluntarily. Voluntary human extinction. This framework supports voluntary human extinction, the gradual reduction of procreation to zero through people choosing not to impose existence on others once they understand the harms and face social consequences. This is different from state mandated population control, which uses violence to prevent reproduction. Voluntary human extinction respects individual autonomy while creating conditions where procreation becomes too costly and morally unacceptable to continue. The goal is ending procreation through making it prohibitively expensive and socially unacceptable, not through a state prohibition enforced by violence. This achieves the anti-natalist goal, ending procreation through anarchist means without state violence. Removing the state prohibition on exit rights does not validate procreation. Removing the state prohibition on the right to a peaceful exit does not make procreation acceptable. Parents who impose existence remain morally culpable of that imposition, regardless of whether the right to exit becomes available. The state's crime, using violence to prevent exit, is separate from parents' crime imposing existence without consent. Both crimes require redress. Demanding the state stop using violence is an anarchist demand for less state control. It is not an excuse to procreate. Conclusion. The root cause identified. This chapter has demonstrated that procreation is the root cause of life slavery. Every harm documented in chapters 1 through 6 traces back to the original decision by parents to create someone without the person's consent. Procreation is not merely one form of harm among many, it is the foundational harm that enables all others. Without procreation, there would be no instances of life slavery. Each person created is another person enslaved, forced into existence without consent, denied the right to opt out, humanely subjected to state violence and capitalist extraction, bearing comprehensive costs while others benefit. Ending procreation is therefore essential to ending life slavery itself. We cannot remedy life slavery for those already existing while continuing to create new victims. Chapter 11 will demonstrate how life abolitionism creates consequences that enforce those who are enriched from life slavery to end it, including the practice of procreation itself that creates all future life slaves. All right, so that is the end of chapter 10. I will be reviewing chapter 11, and I also have appendix that I need to go over. So let's go to some of these comments. Hello, everybody. Well, chapter 11 actually ties it all together, and I do present solutions. Hello. Yes, this is from my book, which I did show the cover. Let me just show you guys the cover again. So the book is Whose Life Is It? The Moral Debt for... Okay, it just disappeared. Okay, why it's coming up? It's Whose Life Is It? The Moral Debt for Life Enslavement. It is available on Amazon. For those of you who are new to the channel, I have already reviewed chapters 1 through 9, and today I'm reviewing chapter 10. So I have one chapter to go through, and I also made it available for free, but it is no longer available for free because I've already used it up. So unfortunately, you guys are going to have to pay for it, or you can just listen to me going through it on YouTube. So all of these live streams are available. How do you give consent to give you life before existence? That's the whole point. It's impossible to give consent. But my framework is different from traditional anti-natism. I don't just focus on consent on the regarding the original imposition. I also focus on unjust enrichment. That even if the non-identity problem is negated because you can't give consent to someone who doesn't exist, you still are necessarily harmed by the unjust enrichment. That your involuntary existence does not benefit you; it benefits your parents and society. They are extracted from your involuntary existence. They owe restitution. For those of you who are new, you might it might be interesting to go back and listen to my previous live streams. Parents owe a moral debt for life enslavement, which I've already reviewed in this chapter, but I originally presented it in chapter 2. But the state also owes its own debt in the form of socialism. That the state is going to prohibit you from opting out by criminalizing medical assistance, then the state has a duty to maintain your involuntary existence in the form of socialism. You should not have to pay to maintain your involuntary existence. If it is in the state's interest that you exist against your will, then the state should have to pay for it. They should pay for your housing, your education, your electricity, your transportation costs. You should not have to bear any of the costs that the state is forcing you to bear. Well, yeah, that's already addressed. This is not traditional anti-natalism. I've already sidestepped the non-identity problem. Exactly, that is the point. Procreation, because humanity needs to continue, reads the same as we have to work in McDonald's, otherwise no one will get their food. Right. It's pure extraction. It's for everyone else's benefit, not you. They don't care about individual rights. You're just here and you should think about the greater good. Stop being selfish. Stop focusing on yourself. That's the reason why I chose that book cover. So I don't know how clearly you can see it, but look at the book cover. Um, Obey my unjust laws, be successful, live for me, follow my morals, validate me, give me grandkids, smile for me, justify my ethics. I go through all of these captions in chapter 8, and I do break it down in detail. So again, it is about, I need to compile it into one like playlist. I have not done it yet, but it is available for you guys to I guess I was going to compile it after I get through chapter 11, but it is available right now. Um, right, exactly. It's purely extraction. A lot of philosophy is a word game. I think saying you would be better off not existing is just a poor way of conveying the information or the idea. They're taking it too literally. This is not purely philosophical. Once you get to chapter 11, I tie it all together. This is more activism. This is a strategy for getting the legal right to not exist, for curbing procreation, to actually imposing consequences for those who procreate. So this is a framework. So it's not necessarily saying that they can't procreate, but even if they do procreate, they have duties that are associated with that they voluntarily assume. They have to leave you an inheritance. They have to respect your autonomy. They have duties to make you self-sufficient, to basically give you life skills so that you can actually be self-sufficient. That is all explained in chapter 2. They're not going to do it voluntarily. That's not how this works. I'm not going to give it away, but I present all that in chapter 11. I'm not saying it's technically true that you wouldn't be better off because you don't exist to be better off, but that's not what a lot of anti-natalism mean. Well, they take it literally, and then they're not trying to engage in good faith. They're just trying to find an excuse. They're looking for wiggle room so they don't have to be held accountable. So this is how anti-natalism has been supposedly debunked by saying that you don't exist, therefore you can't be harmed. My framework is a little bit different. Right, right. Some people see it the opposite way. I mean, and this is what David Benatar also said in his book that human extinction would actually be better for the planet and for the animals. But some people think the other way. They think that more humans actually liberates animals. No, no, I would strongly push back against that. Humans necessarily harm animals, especially if you live in a civilized, developed country. Thank you. No, those who don't have parents don't owe anything. The moral debt for life enslavement only applies to those who procreate. Biological parents, not even adoptive parents. Right. So for those who say, "Oh, I'm not presenting any solutions," no, this book is comprehensive. I'm not sure because they're saying that they're getting hung up on the fact that I'm advocating for um, the right to medical assistance. No, it's comprehensive. It's not the right to medical assistance is only one piece of the puzzle. They're saying, oh, I'm not advocating for any policies to make anybody's quality of life better. I'm just saying that everybody should go off this. That's not what I said. That's not what I said at all. If you read the damn book, which I guess so many people are just let me not be insulting. I'm providing two choices. Either the right to medical assistance or socialism, which is going to measurably improve everyone's quality of life. So for those who have not engaged with my actual arguments, they're getting trapped on medical assistance. And it's like, no, those are two options. If you guys listen to that debate that we had yesterday, that's yeah. I'm like, these people, they have not read my book. I appreciate I appreciate it. What about the prefiguration of life, building the leverage for another life entering the world? I I'm not sure what you mean by that. Are you talking about compulsory civilization? I don't support that. That's what I say explicitly in this chapter. I don't want any state violence forcing people to abstain from procreation. But I don't know. I guess maybe if you could clarify your question. Okay. If life did not exist, or if no more of that existed, and we were intelligent enough to actually make that would be the case, then there would be no need to be no more prefiguration or leverage. Um, I don't know. I'm trying to figure out how to interpret that question. The bottom line is that they procreate because they extract from your involuntary existence. It benefits them. It does not benefit you. So if you prevent the extraction, this is why this you, I think I explained it more in the appendix because I didn't want to disrupt the flow of chapter 11. But I explained why a life slave has no duties. You don't have any duty to be extracted from. You don't have any duty to make the world a better place, to make other people happy. This is what incentivizes procreation. The fact that you were so productive, so useful, so you're such a joy to be around. Nobody's going to support your right to opt out if you're actually useful to them. Once you stop becoming useful, once you live for your own selfishness, for your own happiness, and not, you don't necessarily have to harm anybody, but you don't have to benefit them either. Don't help anybody, stop the extraction, and then you become as useless as you can possibly become, and then they will actually support your right to opt out. Right. I don't, it's an appeal to futility. There are no solutions. The solution that he presented was that AI was going to fix it. That is really offshoring the problem to not even another person, but to a non-person. AI is not going to make anybody's life better. It's going to make everybody's life worse. It's going to be a complete hellscape, which I already addressed in chapter 7. Um, this book is comprehensive. So every question, they don't ask questions though. They just make accusations. So if they actually ask me questions, I can answer them. But they're just saying, "Oh, you're just trying to create your own death cult." That's not what this is. I want people to have the choice to do whatever they want. Well, socialism is not it's not plan A. It's plan B. It's like in the absence of the right to opt out, then they should have to pay for it. So the goal is to make it prohibitively expensive so that they cannot maintain life slavery because it's going to be too costly. Right. That's what I'm saying. That's why I bring up Ayn Rand. If you listen to my recent live stream about Ayn Rand, it talks about altruism and how it preys on your guilt. It makes you feel guilty for not serving other people's needs, for sacrificing yourself to make other people happy. This is what they keep telling me. What about others? You're so selfish. What about the greater good? I reject all of that. Don't be a sacrificial animal. You matter. Your life matters. And you are not here to be extracted from. If you don't enjoy your existence, then you should have the right to opt out. All right, y'all. I guess I am going to end this live stream. So, yeah, I will be reviewing chapter 11 soon, and I have more content that'll be forthcoming. Y'all have a good day.